patterns that the Bureau of Land Management administers today are largely a consequence of the disposal policies of the previous century.
After 1900, Congress continued its disposal policy, but also increasingly looked toward retention and conservation and stewardship of what remained of our nation's vast landed estate.
It was under Theodore Roosevelt that the conservation movement began to take shape. With his advisors, Gifford Pinchot, head of the newly created Forest Service, and James R. Garfield, who became his Secretary of the Interior in 1907, Roosevelt formulated a conservation policy for the federal lands.
The principles which govern the conservation movement, like all great and effective things, are simple and easily understood. It stands for development and provisions for the future.
Conservation means the greatest good to the greatest number for the longest time.
The earth and its resources belong of right to its people.
The nation's forests were the first conservation issue. Passage of the 1891 Reform Act brought the Forest Reserve System into being. At first, administration was under the General Land Office. Then in 1905, responsibility was transferred to the Department of Agriculture and a new bureau, the Forest Service. Aside from the forests, Roosevelt and his cabinet took a look at the public domain's mineral resources in the light of the new conservation ethic.
Many mineral resources were being monopolized by large corporations. Of these, coal particularly was of concern to the emerging industrial nation.
By 1906, fraught with numerous coal land frauds, Teddy Roosevelt made a drastic shift in mineral policy. In July 1906, he began the systematic withdrawal of millions of acres of lands thought to have high coal values.
Classification of public lands was initially structured for sale at fair market value. Then, dissatisfied with the sale program, Roosevelt pushed for adoption of a leasing policy.
At first, Congress resisted the idea of leasing. Then in 1920, Congress legislated for the leasing of coal, petroleum, and other minerals on the classified public lands. Out of the withdrawal and classification of public lands with mineral values came a major conflict. Many of these lands also had high surface values. A means was needed to make these lands available for settlement while withdrawing the subsurface mineral estate. Thus arose the concept of split estate, the separation of surface ownership from subsurface mineral rights. Laws recognizing split estate came in rapid succession. Coal in 1909 and 1910, petroleum and other minerals in 1914. In 1916, with passage of the Stock Raising Homestead Act, Congress provided for the reservation of all minerals to the United States.
The idea of reserving minerals to the United States originated with Teddy Roosevelt.
Our mineral resources are limited and cannot be increased or reproduced. The coal, oil, gas, and phosphate rights still remaining should be withdrawn from entry.
At the time split estate was thought of, it was the perfect conservation ideal. It allowed the lands on the surface to go into agricultural production, while at the same time reserving valuable mineral resources that could be used in the future. However, today, it poses one of the most complex problems that the Bureau of Land Management has to deal with.
The conservation movement under Teddy Roosevelt also turned its attention to water, as evidenced here by Roosevelt Dam in central Arizona. Water always had been in high demand in the West. The value of water for power generation also was recognized in the Roosevelt years. Congress took an active concern in protecting sites with power or reservoir potential. A massive program of withdrawals of power sites began to protect against speculators and monopolies and to retain development for the public good. Aside from water for power, water for agriculture remained a highly charged issue. Often he who controlled the water controlled the land.
Homesteading expanded rapidly with the new conservation era. Teddy Roosevelt's Interior Secretary, James R. Garfield.
Our public land policy has for its aim the use of the public land so that it will promote local development by the settlement of homemakers.
From the Roosevelt administration's commitment to settlement, there emerged new homestead laws.
Irrigation projects funded by private interests had only a smattering of success. It took too much capital. State water initiatives funded under the 1894 Cary Land Act also had limited success. But in 1902, Congress launched a major effort at reclaiming the arid West. 160 acres was available to anyone who could put water on the land. Congress also turned its attention to the semi-arid uplands. In 1909, 320 acres of dry land were allowed for entry.
In 1916, lands were provided for stock-raising homesteads. Entries could be made for a full section of land, or 640 acres. The result? More homesteads were patented after the turn of the century than before.